Things you shouldn't do last minute. Things you shouldn't do at the last minute.
And have a good first day at school. Daddy's gay.
Thank you. That was an interesting one. Unlikely first lines of medical ads.
Ever wonder how food becomes poo?
Been decapitated recently?
All right.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, February the 15th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivational shorts, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and Inside Delta Force. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, the news.
I'll ask you about Israel in a second, but just a quick follow-up just to put this to rest. Obviously, the House Intelligence Chair speaking out about a imminent, or he doesn't say imminent, serious national security threat. The lack of your ability to say anything has the potential to raise distress for some Americans. In the simplest of terms, can you tell Americans that there's nothing they have to worry about right now in terms of what he describes as a national security threat?
Look, I think in a way that question is impossible to answer with a straight yes, right? Because Americans understand that there are a range of threats and challenges in the world that we're dealing with every single day. And those threats and challenges range from terrorism to state actors. And we have to contend with them, and we have to contend with them in a way where we ensure the ultimate security of the American people. I am confident that President Biden, in the decisions that he is taking, is going to ensure the security of the American people going forward. And I will stand here at this podium and assert that, look you in the eye with confidence, that we believe that we can and will and are protecting the national security of the United States and the American people.
Perfect. Thank you for your answer. I just want to ask you then about Israel, which is my primary question here, which is that the White House has said it would like to have from Israel a credible plan in terms of what it's going to do in Rafah to avoid civilian casualties there. What does the White House believe that plan needs to look like, and what is the consequence for Israel if it doesn't meet that desire of the United States?
So I'm not going to lay out all of the details standing here at the podium, because those are intensive conversations we're having with the Israeli government right now in detail. But broadly speaking, it means being able to deal with three realities. One reality, you've got more than 1 million people in a very small area, and those people have to have a place to go that is safe. A second reality is that the aid that Palestinian civilians rely upon comes in through Rafah. And so if military operations either disrupt the crossings, Kerem Shalom and Rafah crossing coming in, or disrupt the distribution points, that will make it more difficult to move aid around. So we need answers to the question, not only where do people go, but how do they get a sustained level of aid, food, medicine, water, shelter. And then the third reality is that this is pressed right up against the Egyptian border. And you've heard directly from the Egyptians their concern about what that could potentially mean on that border, and there needs to be a clear answer to that question as well. Those are the kinds of things we are talking about with the Israeli government, and the president has been clear, as he said in his remarks on Monday, we need to see that credible and implementable plan.
And the consequence if they don't meet that?
So I'm not going to speculate here today on the if-then hypothetical. I will just say that our position on the question of Rafah is clear, and we are pressing very hard on this basic issue that you've got exposed, vulnerable civilians in Rafah. They need to be protected.
Thank you, Jay.
And that was the news. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the military short.
Right now, the U.S. military is weak. There are some big problems that need fixing before World War III. Let me explain. The U.S. military is currently around half the size it should be, and the majority of the nation's tanks, ships, and aircraft are more than 30 years old. The soldiers are even receiving far less training than is required for them to be capable of combat. But Pentagon leaders keep claiming that the U.S. military is still the greatest in the world. Well, the Cold War was the last time the United States faced a significant enemy on a global scale, and the numbers back then were very different to now. An Air Force pilot flew more than 200 hours a year during the Cold War. The average pilot today logs less than 130 hours, while Chinese rivals fly more than 200. But the troops and Navy numbers are even more scary. There were 700,000 active soldiers in the Army in 1989. There are only 450,000 now, and this figure keeps dropping every year. The U.S. Navy had around 600 ships. Right now it has 292.
And that was the military short. Back in a minute. Thank you very much. And now, a little motivation.
In order to develop and to change and to grow, stress is necessary. A seed has to be planted. A seed got to have dirt put on top of it. Dirt is necessary for growth and development. Dirt builds character. Dirt makes you come with it when you don't feel like coming with it no more. And you get dirt in a lot of different ways. Is somebody talking about you down on your job? Is somebody accusing you of something that you didn't do? Everybody get dirt put on them. But see, when you're getting put under that stress, stress really ain't just dirt. See, they don't call it dirt when they plant it. They call it soil. Because, see, soil has nutrients in it. So when people talking about you, dogging you, stealing from you, talking about you, they're actually putting nutrients in you. They're building character.
You see, in order to develop real quality, it takes time. And it takes pain, and it takes endurance, and it takes grief, and it takes trouble, and it takes turmoil, and it takes destruction and demolition. God works in the dirt. And when you pray to stay out of the dirt, you're praying to stay away from God, because he stoops down to the dirt. And he makes you in the dirt, and he shapes you in the dirt, and he forms you in the dirt. The opportunity to grow happens in your life, in your home, in your heart, in your spirit. And you are being planted, but you feel like you're being buried. When you plant a seed, it feels buried, but it was planted to rise again. And most of us think we are being buried, when in fact we are only being planted. And when you are planted, that means you're going to get up again. And when you are planted, that means you're going to come forth again. And when you are planted, that means that this is not how the story ends. This is not the end. Don't run from it. Don't hide from it. Don't duck from it. Don't dodge from it. Don't run trying to get away from it, because you are not being buried. You are being planted.
You got to get disappointed. You got to get told no. You're going to ask somebody for some money. He's going to tell you no. That's just dirt. See, you get mad when haters come your way. You get mad because you get a setback. You get mad because you lost your mama. That's dirt. But show me something that has grown into something beautiful that didn't have no dirt on it. You got to have dirt on you to grow into what God got for you.
Some of you were soft, but you were born in the dark, and now you're soft. Every time you come up to a challenge, you quit, you surrender, you give up, you give in. Every single time I'm going through pain, I remember that I've gone through pain since I was a kid. I draw from it, recycle the pain. Get something from it. You're already in pain. Use it. Do something with it. Allow it to take you to the next level. Allow your pain to push you to greatness.
Your brain is the most powerful weapon in the world. Your brain is the only thing you have when you're going through depression, when you're going through hard times, you're going through death, real life shit. You're alone. You're alone. You may have a shrink you're going to, you may have a best friend you're going to, but there's 24 hours in the day where you're alone in this brain. And your brain is talking to you in all kind of ways. And it wants to control you and pull you in these different pockets. If you can't control your own brain and your brain controls you, you're f***ed. You got to tell your brain where you want to go and how you want to go and how you want to get there. You got to control it. If not, it's over. It's over. You got to shut off technology. You got to go here. I call it the dark room, where you're alone. No cell phones, no music, no TVs, no computers. You by yourself. Very few people want to be alone anymore. They want to be around noise and people, and you can't think. Be alone. Go to that dark space. In that dark space, shut life off for a little bit. Go to a dark place in your mind and figure out what the f*** you want to be. You don't know what you want to be because you haven't spent time, real time with yourself. Spend time with yourself. Trust me. And once you find that passion, that purpose, your goals, your purpose, everything will just start lining up. And then you'll find the courage to start that journey. For you to find greatness in yourself, you're not going to find it by looking in a book or by even hearing me. I may give you the spark, but you've got to go inside yourself to find it. And that means you gotta be quiet. Shut the fuck up, go in a room, stop talking, search your soul, search your mind, search your abilities, and you'll find it. But if you're not looking for it, you won't find it. So you gotta go start your journey. And the journey starts with you finding, why the hell am I here on this planet Earth? Why am I here? And if you don't know that, you will live the rest of your life searching, always asking the question, why? The most important conversation you will ever have in your life is the one you have with yourself. You wake up with it, you walk around with it, you go to bed with it, eventually you're going to act on it, whether it's good or bad. You have to face that in that dark room. In that dark room is who you are. But in that dark room is where you have to create another human being that walks out of that dark room to face who you are. That's the only way you're going to get over all those things. You have to create someone else. In the dark room, you face yourself. You realize you want to be better. You realize you don't want to be this weak, insecure person in the world who has all these problems that we all have. When you really sit back at your life and you're in that dark room and you're looking at where you started from, and then you put a goal in your mind, how are you going to feel, man, when you accomplish this goal coming from that shit? Coming from the hell you came from. A lot of people start from a good starting point. They have a good foundation. What if you can surpass all of these motherfuckers? What if everybody who was way up here started up here, and you started with no legs. You had to grow legs to even start walking, and then crawling, then running, and then you start passing people with all this given to them. I had to use all this negative shit that was making me weak and horrible as a person. I had to use this as the power that now fueled me. I had to flip it on his head and say, hold up. This might be exactly what I need. The darkness is exactly what I need. It's how you look at your situation. So many people that have the ability and just refuse to get off that couch. Refuse to study a few more hours. Refuse to go deeper, to go further. And that's where I gain the advantage. It's so easy to be great nowadays, my friend, because most people are weak. Most people don't want to go to that extra mile. Most people don't want to find that extra because it sucks. It's miserable. It's lonely.
Hard times create hard men. Hard men create soft times. Soft times create soft men. Soft men create hard times. We are now around soft men and hard times. You can't be weak. And in this country, being weak is thought of as a virtue. Jordan Peterson has a really interesting way of looking at this, and he said it to me once, and it made a lot of sense. He said, people think that you should be weak and you should be docile, and then you should be a pacifist. He goes, no, you should be a monster. He said you should be a monster, you should be ruthlessly ambitious, and then learn how to control it. And it's that old expression, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. It's an old expression, but it makes sense. Because it doesn't mean that you can't be kind if you're strong. But it does mean you can't be strong if you're weak.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the daily law for February 15th.
February 15th. Concentrated practice cannot fail. For the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Men become builders by building, and lyre players by playing the lyre. Aristotle. Although it might seem that the time necessary to master the requisite skills and attain a level of expertise would depend on the field and your own talent level, those who have researched the subject repeatedly come up with the number of 10,000 hours. This seems to be the amount of quality practice time that is needed for someone to reach a high level of skill, and it applies to composers, chess players, writers, and athletes, among others. This number has an almost magical or mystical resonance to it. It means that so much practice time, no matter the person or the field, leads to a qualitative change in the human brain. The mind has learned to organize and structure large amounts of information. With all of this tacit knowledge, it can now become creative and playful with it. Although the number of hours might seem high, it generally adds up to 7 to 10 years of sustained solid practice, roughly the period of a traditional apprenticeship. In other words, concentrated practice over time cannot fail but produce results. Daily law. Put in an hour of concentrated practice today and tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Mastery Chapter 3. Absorb the master's power. The mentor dynamic.
And that was the Daily Law for February 15th from the book The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
My ability to speak articulately is correlated very directly to my ability to hear. If I hear certain voices, I'm going to start reproducing them. That's the way we learn language. A lot of people in our culture, they are attuned to other voices. The voice I've talked about a lot with you of subjectivist individualism, the voice of moral relativism. If these are all the voices we ever hear, that's all we're ever going to say. What's the point? We in our culture are often deaf to the voice of God, deaf to this higher voice that speaks a divine spiritual truth, that speaks of eternal moral values, that speaks of the existence and demand and invitation of God. We're deaf to that voice. And therefore, what? We are inarticulate in our capacity to express these truths. Because we can't hear them, we can't speak them.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And for the Ayn Rand thought of the day, it's going to be a quote from Harry Binswanger from the AynRand.org, and it's called "Buy American is Un-American." What concerns me is the false notion, quote, "What concerns me is the false notion that by subscribing to the Buy American campaign, you are somehow performing an act of patriotism or are helping America. Both ideas are false. Consider the moral meaning of America. Individualism prescribes that all relations among men must be voluntary, that men must deal with each other as independent equals who cooperate for mutual benefit, neither party sacrificing the interests of the other. The moral basis of individualism is the ethics of egoism, rational selfishness. But Buy American represents the altruistic ethics of self-sacrifice. It is the demand that you buy not the product that is best for you, but one that is more expensive, lower quality, or less reliable, in the name of benefiting inefficient American businessmen and workers. The political economic expression of individualism is capitalism, the system of private property and free trade for private profit. If Americanism means anything, it means capitalism. Capitalism does not stop at the borders of a nation. Free trade is what capitalism means internationally. The fundamental error in economic nationalism is that it's blind to the life and death difference between economic competition and physical conflict. Economic competition is a rivalry in producing and offering values. It is ultimately a form of cooperation under the division of labor. Physical conflict is a destructive form of opposition in which at least one party must lose. And for all these reasons, Buy American is un-American. A patriotic American acts as a capitalist and an individualist. He buys the best. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up with the next chapter in 33 Strategies of War.
Chapter 14. Overwhelm resistance with speed and suddenness. The Blitzkrieg strategy. In a world in which many people are indecisive and overly cautious, the use of speed will bring you untold power. Striking first, before your opponents have time to think or prepare, will make them emotional, unbalanced, and prone to error. When you follow with another swift and sudden maneuver, you will induce further panic and confusion. This strategy works best with a setup, a lull. Your unexpected action catches your enemy off guard. When you strike, hit with unrelenting force. Acting with speed and decisiveness will garner you respect, awe, and irresistible momentum. Slow, slow, quick, quick. In 1218, Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, received a visit from 3 ambassadors on behalf of Genghis Khan, the leader of the Mongol Empire to the east. The visitors bore magnificent gifts, and more important, the offer of a treaty between the two powers that would allow the reopening of the lucrative Silk Road connecting China and Europe. The Shah's empire was immense, incorporating present-day Iran and much of Afghanistan. His capital, Samarkand, was fabulously wealthy, a symbol of his power, and increased trade along the route would only add to these riches. Since the Mongols made it clear they considered him the superior partner in the deal, the Shah decided to sign the treaty. A few months later, a Mongol caravan arrived in the city of Otrar, in the northeastern corner of the Shah's empire, with a mission to buy luxury items for the Mongol court. The governor of Otrar suspected the men in the caravan of being spies. He had them killed, and he seized the goods they had brought to barter. Hearing of this outrage, Genghis Khan dispatched an ambassador, escorted by 2 soldiers, to the Shah, calling for an apology. The demand, which presumed to put the 2 empires on equal footing, incensed the Shah. He had the ambassador's head cut off and sent back to Genghis Khan. This, of course, meant war. The Shah was not afraid. His army, anchored by its well-trained Turkish cavalry, numbered over 400,000, at least twice the enemy's size. By defeating the Mongols in battle, the Shah could finally take over their land. He assumed the Mongols would attack Transoxiana, the easternmost part of the Shah's empire. Bordered to the east by the 500-mile-long Sirdarya River, to the north by the Kizilkum Desert, and the west by the Amudarya River, Transoxiana's interior was also home to 2 of the most important cities of the empire, Samarkand and Bukhara. The Shah decided to establish a cordon of soldiers along the Sirdarya, which the Mongols would have to cross to enter his empire. They could not cross from the north, the desert was impassable, and to go to the south would be too great a detour. Keeping the bulk of his army in the interior of Transoxiana, he would be able to place reinforcements where needed. He had an impregnable defensive position and superiority in numbers. Let the Mongols come. He would crush them. In the summer of 1219, scouts reported that the Mongols were approaching the southern end of the Sirdarya through the Fergana Valley. The Shah sent a large force under the leadership of his son, Jalal ad-Din, to destroy the enemy. After a fierce battle, the Mongols retreated. Jalal ad-Din reported back to his father that the Mongol army was not nearly as fearsome as their reputation. The men looked haggard, their horses emaciated, and they seemed none too eager to sustain a fight. The Shah, believing the Mongols no match for his army, put more troops at the southern end of the cordon and waited. A few months later, a Mongol battalion appeared without warning in the north, attacking the city of Otrar and capturing its governor, the same man responsible for the outrage against the Mongol traders. The Mongols killed him by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears. Stunned by how quickly they had managed to reach Otrar, and from an unexpected direction, the Shah decided to shift more troops to the north. These barbarians might move swiftly, he reasoned, but they could not overcome an entrenched army with such great numbers. Next, however, 2 Mongol armies swept south from Otrar, running parallel to the Sirdarya, One, under General Joshi, began to attack key towns along the river, while the other, under General Jebe, disappeared to the south. Like locusts, Joshi's army swarmed through the hills and lowlands near the river. The Shah moved a good portion of his army to the river, keeping some reserves in Samarkand. Joshi's force was relatively small, 20,000 at most. These mobile units hit one position after another without warning, burning forts and wreaking havoc. Reports from the front lines began to give the Shah a picture of these strange warriors from the east. Their army was all cavalry. Each Mongol not only rode a horse, but was trailed by several more riderless horses, all mares, and when his own horse tired, he would mount a fresh one. These horses were light and fast. The Mongols were unencumbered by supply wagons. They carried their food with them, drank the mare's milk and blood, and killed and ate the horses that had become weak. They could travel twice as fast as their enemy. Their marksmanship was extraordinary. Facing forward or in retreat, they could fire arrows with remarkable dexterity, making their attacks far deadlier than anything the Shah's army had ever seen. Their divisions communicated over great distances with flags and torches. Their maneuvers were precisely coordinated and nearly impossible to anticipate. Dealing with this constant harassment exhausted the Shah's forces. Now, suddenly, the army under General Jebe that had disappeared to the south reappeared heading northwest into Transoxiana at remarkable speed. The Shah hurriedly sent south his last reserves, an army of 50,000, to do battle with Jebe. He still was not worried. His men had proved their superiority in direct combat at the battle in the Fergana Valley. This time, however, it was different. The Mongols unleashed strange weapons. Their arrows were dipped in burning tar, which created smoke screens behind which their lightning-quick horsemen advanced, opening breaches in the lines of the Shah's army through which more heavily armed cavalry would advance. Chariots darted back and forth behind the Mongol lines, bringing up constant supplies. The Mongols filled the sky with arrows, creating relentless pressure. They wore shirts of heavy silk. An arrow that managed to pierce the shirt would rarely reach the flesh and could be extracted easily by pulling at the shirt. All of this done while moving at great speed. Jebe's army annihilated the Shah's forces. The Shah had one option left: retreat to the west, retrench, and slowly rebuild his army. As he began preparations, however, something beyond belief occurred. An army under Genghis Khan himself suddenly stood outside the gates of the city of Bukhara, to the west of Samarkand. Where had they come from? They could not have crossed the Kizilkum Desert to the north. Their appearance seemed all but impossible, as if the devil himself had conjured them up. Bukhara soon fell, and within days Samarkand followed. Soldiers deserted, generals panicked. The Shah, fearing for his life, fled with a handful of soldiers. The Mongols pursued him relentlessly. Months later, on a small island in the Caspian Sea, abandoned by one and all, wearing rags and begging for food, the former ruler of the wealthiest empire in the East finally died of hunger. Interpretation. When Genghis Khan became the leader of the Mongol nation, he inherited perhaps the fastest army on the planet, but their swiftness had translated into limited military success. The Mongols might have perfected the art of fighting on horseback, but they were too undisciplined to exploit any advantage they gained this way, or to coordinate for a large-scale attack. The genius of Genghis Khan was to transform the chaotic Mongol speed into something organized, disciplined, and strategic. He achieved this by adapting the ancient Chinese strategy of slow, slow, quick, quick. The first step, slow, was to meticulously prepare before any campaign, which the Mongols always did to the highest degree. In planning for the attack on the Shah, the Mongols learned of a guide who knew of a chain of oases across the Kizilkum Desert. This man was captured and later led Genghis Khan's army across the forbidding territory. The second slow was a setup, which involved getting the enemy to lower its guard, lulling it into complacency. The Mongols, for example, deliberately lost the first battle in the Fergana Valley to feed the Shah's arrogance.
And that was the first part of Chapter 14, Overwhelm Resistance, and from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican because President Biden is not only the face of the country, the leader of the country, but he is the titular head of the Democrat Party. And what he does reflects on the Democrat Party and everybody in it. So right now, the Democrat Party is a party that wanders around not knowing where it's going, what it's doing, or what it's saying. It is brain-addled. And you, as a voter, deserve better. That's why you need to vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from Varney and Company. Let's see.
I would prefer an elderly man over an elderly man who's just chaotic and crazy and has.
So this is where they're going. The news person is on Capitol Hill interviewing Democrats about President Biden and whether or not he is fit to serve in the face of this report that says that he's an elderly man with memory problems. And all of them are hacking off and saying, oh, yeah, he's a swell guy. This particular guy comes out and says, oh, I'd prefer him to some elderly guy with that's wacky and crazy and has 91 indictments or something. And then what he's doing here, he doesn't mention any names. You need to, anytime somebody pulls this stunt with you, you need to put them on the spot and say, excuse me, who are you talking about? Who is this that's crazy and wacky and has 91 indictments? Because I've never heard of any such person. So who would that be? Make them earn it. Make them earn it. If they're going to win and they earn it, so be it. I still don't want them to win, but that's much better, much preferable to they half-ass it and we hand them the victory. So again, put them on the spot. This guy's trying to be transparent. Don't let him do it. Demand that he tell you who he's talking about. Give us details. And if they don't want to do it, then say, oh, well, then obviously you have nothing to say, and walk away. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we begin a new chapter with Inside Delta Force.
I asked for and received the loan of a platoon during our stay here. I wanted a rifle squad standing by on a 24-hour basis. The platoon would stay out of sight, but with one squad suited up and ready to go, while the rest of the outfit lounged in place and rested. It was nice to have a little muscle backing us up, ready to provide assistance in case we stirred up a hornet's nest. You could never tell what might happen around this place. After briefing the platoon leader and his squad leaders, Andre and I got out our spotting scopes and spent the rest of the afternoon looking over the area habituated by the shooters. We identified several potential hide positions and made a detailed sketch of the area. We stayed in our observation spot and watched for 2 hours after it was full dark. We wanted to get to know the landscape both as the light faded and as darkness came on. Then we pulled back to the Marine TOC for a sea ration and a last coordination briefing with the Major. When we finally went out, we didn't want anyone acting out of the ordinary. We didn't want anyone to overwatch our movement or trot out any assistance unless we called for it. Radio silence was an imperative. If we needed any help, we'd call for it. As long as the ready squad was awake, in full equipment and ready to go, the rest of the reaction platoon could stay asleep. In fact, we preferred it that way. We were prepared to stay in position 4 days. If the mission was unresolved at the end of those 4 days, we would pull back, resupply, then go back into position. We would come and go only at night and would always make a radio call first. We marked our probable positions on the map and asked the major to make sure no one fired any flares at night. If we needed to move around at all, it would be while it was dark, and we didn't want our position compromised. It was a simple plan requiring very little coordination, and we wanted everyone to stay loose until the task was accomplished. We made a last equipment check, told the platoon leader who owned the sector we were going out, and crept out into the darkness between the Marines and the people who were shooting at them. We made our nest in a large scattered heap of rubble and garbage. The place looked like it had been used to dispose of materials from demolished buildings, and God knows there was enough of that stuff around here. Once we were satisfied with our position, we took turns crawling outside and forward to check it out from the enemy side through our night vision goggles. It wasn't the perfect way to check a hide site, but it was the best we could do under the circumstances. Next, we measured off distances and angles to several nearby objects. Tomorrow, we would take sightings on possible target locations, and then, using the trigonometric tables in our sniper data books, we would calculate ranges to targets. Even though we had brought our brand new laser rangefinder with us, we didn't quite trust it yet, so we wanted to compare its findings with the old tried and true method. Finally, we settled into our position and both drifted off into field sleep for the remaining hours of darkness. Old combat soldiers know what I'm talking about. When you're in the field on a mission, there is always someone awake and on guard. But with just the two of us out there, we couldn't split the guard duty. Instead, during the nights, we would trust in the concealment of our position. That and the fact that we were both trained to sleep and gain rest and still keep a part of our minds on alert. You're asleep, but you're also awake. Your mind is resting, but if anything moves nearby or something makes a sound that registers as a danger, you are instantly and completely awake. Field sleep wasn't the only mind-over-body skill possessed by Delta Force snipers. We were also trained to consciously slow our heart rates. This enabled us to literally shoot between heartbeats, critical once you realize that the thump of a heartbeat can throw a shot as much as several feet off course at long range. This also gave us the ability to direct warmth to different parts of the body so we could selectively warm a trigger finger or feet that had gotten too cold. We could also lie perfectly still for hours on end, letting the body rest even though the mind was staying active. Doing so made it possible to intently watch a target for many hours without losing interest or the mind wandering, and still be ready for immediate action. Think of it as having the patience of a reptile. These invaluable skills were attributable to the biofeedback training we received from the unit psychologist. Day 1 was quiet. We spent the daylight hours rotating on and off the spotting scope 30 minutes at a time to minimize eye fatigue. We took ranging shots with the laser rangefinder and found it to be perfectly accurate when we compared its results with our mathematical range calculations. The range to the shantytown slum that was our target area was roughly 250 to 350 meters. The ground from our position to the target sloped gently uphill with a few scattered heaps of junk and abandoned buildings in the intervening space. There were no trees of significance, just a sparse ground covering of scraggly weeds and dry brush where an old donkey ambled aimlessly in search of grazing. On the extreme right of the area was a series of partially destroyed greenhouses, derelict reminders of more prosperous days. We could see quite a few people going about their daily affairs, and as always, when we viewed them through high-powered lenses, we soon came to know the people we observed. Several small boys came out into the scrub between us and the village, and I watched as they ran back and forth, yelling and slapping the ground with sticks. What the hell are they doing? I wondered. Then one of them held up a trophy, and the other boys ran up to admire his kill. They were hunting lizards. I hoped their hunt wouldn't bring them near our hide site. They would just about have to step on us to discover our location, but then young boys have a habit of poking into all sorts of places. If the kids detected us, we would just walk away and try the mission again later. But it would certainly complicate matters. The only time we would shoot in self-defense was if an armed person stumbled right on top of us. Then we would use our silenced pistols, but only if we were certain we'd been detected and had no other choice. But nothing happened. The day passed without incident, and soon the afternoon sun gradually slid down behind us and extinguished itself in the blue Mediterranean. The night air carried voices easily, and we could hear conversations and family activity in the little finger of Beirut sticking out in front of us. Being a sniper is the same as being a voyeur, but you often see things you wish you hadn't. I watched a man give his young son a beating that night, and I positively ached to put a bullet through the hand wielding that stick. I know more than a little about beatings like that, and no child could possibly deserve that kind of a whipping. I also know discipline when I see it, and this wasn't discipline. It was pure meanness for meanness's sake. I hoped the bastard was one of the shooters, but I knew he wouldn't be. This man was a coward. He would never take the risk of shooting at U.S. Marines, even from the safety of a crowd of children. No, the shooters we were looking for might be a lot of things, but they weren't cowards. Deluded, perhaps. Stupid, maybe. Doomed, certainly. Day 2 was basically a repeat of day 1. Lazy, quiet, somnolent. That night we took turns watching a John Wayne movie playing on television in one of the houses. It was one of my favorite films, The Searchers. The Marines had been great so far. I had been a little worried that in their eagerness to help, they might give us away by some act of attentiveness, but it hadn't happened. I remembered all too vividly one time when it had, on a night jump into 29 Palms Marine Corps Base some years before. The Marines wanted to help us because they just couldn't imagine anybody having to parachute into the desert in the middle of the night. So a bunch of the guys had ringed themselves around the drop zone waiting for us, and when they heard the planes overhead, fired flares into the sky. Worst jump of my life. Night vision destroyed, blinded by the flares, and in the grip of high winds, I crashed into the ground like a sack of shit, wrenching a hip on impact. Then the flares went out and I was blind again. But one ranger had it much worse. I found him draped over his rucksack, unconscious, with a bone sticking out of his lower leg. Save us from the help of the well-meaning, I thought, as my partner and I lay in our cramped but homey position. Which brings to mind something some of you have probably wondered about. How snipers take care of bodily functions in position like that for such a long time. The answer is, liquids go in a bottle and solids go in a plastic bag. And while you're putting them in there, your buddy gives you a little extra room and some friendly encouragement. When it's his turn, you do the same for him. And when you leave the location, you take the filled containers and everything else you brought in with you right back out again. We were now on day 3, and the hours were passing quietly. I had just glanced at my watch, 5:35, and when I looked back again, a group of people was starting to gather at a spot we had labeled Position 4. It was at the end of a narrow alley and was bordered on the right by a high wall of concrete blocks. "Action at 4, Andre," I said, as I rolled from behind the spotting scope and we both took position behind our rifles. I brought the scope on to point 4 and quickly adjusted the sights for a range of 320 meters. Then I fully lowered the handle of the bolt, securely locking the round in the chamber. I let my finger find its place on the trigger and picked up a breathing rhythm that would cause the least movement to my sights. I adjusted for the shot by sliding my right knee back and away from my heart. I knew Andre was doing the same sorts of things. In contrast to the last 3 days of inactivity, things now moved with an uncanny speed. There was an ominous feeling to the view before me. Seconds ago, the mouth of the alley had been an empty, dusty spot. Then 4 or 5 teenagers appeared from nowhere. Now there must be 20 or 25 kids in the spot, all laughing, jeering, and pointing at the Marine position in the distance. They were calling and waving to someone behind them, someone hidden behind the concrete wall. "Here it comes, Eric," Andre breathed. "Ready," I whispered, as the first shooter stepped out. I slipped him into the hairs of my sights. He was carrying an AK and glad-handing the crowd. Call it when yours is out, I said softly, and you have a shot. My man was now facing in my direction. He started to lift his rifle. I knew Andre had his man in sight as well, when just a split second later he intoned, "Snipers, ready, fire." Thwomp! The two rifles spat their venom at the same instant. I was holding my sights on the upper lip of the young man when my rifle coughed, and as I rocked back with the recoil, he disappeared. A killing shot drops a man so fast it seems like the earth just gulps him down. When I came back to rest again, the only hint that just an instant before a man had been standing there was a faint pink halo of atomized blood and tissue momentarily suspended in the air. The chimera dissolved almost as soon as I saw it, and faded to nothing in the hot afternoon sun. "Dead," I said as I chambered a fresh round. "Dead," Andre replied as he did the same. We watched as the crowd erupted. The bodies of the two men had been hurled to the ground before the sound of the shots reached the group. Some people in the crowd ran. Some seemed to want to help, but they clearly didn't know what to do. Others stooped over the bodies, horror on their faces. A few of the more experienced ones hurled themselves out of sight and screamed at the rest to move to cover. Andre and I scanned from the center out. I searched in an arc to the left. Andre took the arc to the right. We had to make sure no one had figured out where the shots came from. When I looked back at the target area, I saw a few faces peering around the corner of the wall and others at the corner of a building. On my next sweep, I saw some of the braver lads move in and drag their friends' bodies out of sight. It was done. We didn't have much to say the rest of the afternoon, but I could read Andre's mood, and I was sure he could read mine. We had accomplished our mission, but it was nothing we could take pride in. I felt soiled and slightly guilty, as if I had stolen something and nobody knew it but me. When the action is hot and you know you're saving innocent lives with your shooting prowess, there is a certain elation to sniping. But this one didn't feel that way. It had been a necessary act, but an unpalatable one. And the only thing that remained was a vague, nasty taste in the back of my throat that refused to go away. We stayed in our lair until darkness covered the land, and then we slithered back to the relative safety of the American position. In the spring of 1981, Delta started work on a mission that spanned more than 2 years, yet never took place. That lost mission haunts me to this day. In fact, it bothers me more and more as time goes by. I've given a great deal of thought as to whether or not to write about this. Once I decided to do so, I wrestled with how to write about it. I've come to the conclusion that there is only one way: hard and fast. In 1981, we, elements of the United States government, knew that approximately 125 American prisoners of war were still alive and in the hands of the government of North Vietnam. The men were being held in secret camps located in Laos, so when North Vietnam would periodically say there are no American prisoners alive in Vietnam, they were technically telling the truth. Immediately, an intelligence effort was mounted to pinpoint the exact location of the prisoners. At the same time, Delta Force initiated planning to conduct a rescue operation. We worked very rapidly and had gotten as far as completing a full-scale dress rehearsal of the proposed raid when the mission started to unravel. It was eventually scuttled. Scuttled is probably the wrong word to use. The rescue effort was methodically pulled apart, piece by piece, until the only thing left was the unpleasant rumor of live POWs. I do not claim to know the full story behind this tale. I know only the small portion Delta was involved in, along with other bits and pieces of information I've gleaned in the years since. From first to last, the mission was so highly compartmentalized that I'm sure only a handful of people know the whole story. But from what I know firsthand, and have learned from individuals I trust, I believe some of those who were in the know made a desperate and ultimately successful attempt to make sure no live Americans would emerge from captivity in Vietnam. And yes, that is a painful thing to even contemplate. By the summer of 1981, we were ready to launch. We had just conducted a final rehearsal successfully duplicating mission intricacies such as nighttime in-flight helicopter refueling by tanker C-130s while flying nap of the Earth through mountain passes for long distances. Since this was only about a year after Iran, B Squadron in particular didn't relish that aspect of the mission. But in stark contrast to the Iran raid, this time we would use Air Force helicopters flown by Air Force crews, most of whom had flown search and rescue missions in Vietnam. These men could be trusted not to quit. To make our rehearsal as realistic as possible, we actually rescued a class of Air Force pilots undergoing POW training. We wanted men who would really act like prisoners, and anyone who had ever undergone SERE, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, training, will tell you that within 12 hours of being in camp, you believe you are a prisoner of war. SERE is brutally real because it has to be. It is intended to prepare men for capture and interrogation. We fought our way into the POW camp, and sure enough, the pilots behaved like actual prisoners. The 50 men in the bunker my team hit were all cowering in fear in the farthermost corner of their dark, dank prison. They were so afraid of their captors, we had to literally drag them outside to the waiting choppers. The team hitting the other bunker had just the opposite problem. When the men realized they were being rescued, they were so ecstatic they had to be restrained from killing their jailers. We rapidly loaded the recovered prisoners on the waiting helicopters and got the hell out of Dodge. It was a good rehearsal. Everything worked perfectly, and we were confident that the real rescue mission would succeed. All we needed was the word to go, when one of the most bizarre things imaginable happened. Retired Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel Bo Gritz popped up on national television announcing his intent to rescue a group of U.S. POWs being held in Southeast Asia. Gritz said that he had concrete information as to the location of the prisoners and was putting together a team to effect their rescue. During the interview, he trotted out the members of his supposed rescue team and the handful of weapons that constituted their arsenal. They were not impressive. He went on to say that his team had just completed rehearsals at their secret Florida base of operations and that they would be launching the mission within days.
And that was the next part of 2 years later from Inside Delta Force by Eric Haney, Command Sergeant Major, retired. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.